not a good defining tool of the movement. It's not where you would send somebody to find out what the movement is. It's where they could connect with like-minded activists who are coming together for social change.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've found, there's this kind of strange aesthetic when I encounter and hang around with people who are very much socially conscious and socially active as well. I find that there's this, it's almost like an electricity in a sense. They're having a lot of their values confirmed and validated. And, that's another one of the things that you brought up in one of your lectures, that people like people who confirm that they're right. I think that was the...
Yeah. Well, I talked about the quality of brilliance and how anytime that you find yourself saying, oh yeah, that person's brilliant, what it really translates to is that person agrees with things that you already came to the table with. We don't usually say that about somebody that is sharing information that's so new that it's a shock to us. There had to be something there before, like enough common things that you already knew, beliefs that you had that were in alignment with what that person's communicating for you to even have the evaluation of brilliant. Because otherwise, what's your measure? So in other words, they make me right with what they're saying. So you can do that. You can create a quality of brilliance when you're talking to people by, just as you mentioned before, validating them in their concerns and things that you're in agreement with, and finding that first before you even talk too much in detail about the resource-based economic model components. It's about finding what they care about. Whether it's that, equality is a big issue for them, making a personal contribution is an issue for them. Maybe, there are even people within the scientific community that think we're crazy. But, I would my common ground with them is the scientific method. So, it's about finding the common values that allow you to affirm what they already believe, and in a very authentic way. Like, I wouldn't do it inauthentically. There's no need to do that. There are too many things to find agreement on as far as the current social conditions and issues with it. There's always something you can connect with that people will say, yeah, that's been my experience too.
I guess, off the top of your head, would you say that there are any notable or memorable incidents where something has occurred in communication, and there was either some sort of indicator of successful communication of the train of thought to someone who you would never have thought would get it at all, or something where a person has displayed a particular level of belligerence that you were able to manage in a productive way? Would you say that there are any particular instance that you could recall?
I don't know. I kind of know what you're looking for as far as a dramatic transformation of, like, I said something and then they shifted. But I'm thinking more in terms of opening people up where they are. If I can tell that someone is, for example, a free market advocate, I am not going to make them wrong, because I know that's not going to forward the conversation. It's just going to turn into a debate. So I guess I speak within the commonalities and I ask questions. And I would say it's not all the time resolved right there immediately. I have, however, had people that I've come into contact with, or that I've read accounts of, who have encountered the films, who have transitioned quite a bit from their previous conservative, capitalistic worldview, that by watching the Zeitgeist films have done a 180. And that I hear frequently. But it's not something I was there for. And I think that's because the process was something they initiated on their own and explored on their own.
Yeah, I'd say for me that, there's been quite a few it's mainly been the fact that, for whatever reason, as an individual, I've never been considered anywhere near the top of the social strata. So it's mostly been cases of, me not being taken seriously by the group, and especially if they perceive that I'm coming out with these wild ass assertions about, what the world's going to be controlled by a big giant central computer, and robots are going to be stealing our jobs, and we're going to be having flying floating cities, and no, and people just come out with all these sort of like projections. But it's mostly been the case where I've just tried to be rational with some people. I've tried to sort of steer them towards the path of encouraging them to, if they've made any positive claims about myself, when we're actually supposed to be discussing a topic itself, then I just say, look, can you just please drop the ad homs and let's just talk about this sort of thing? I do in a sense, like, feel bad that I'm not able to get through to some of the people that I get through to, but
well, I think you have to understand sort of the dynamics there. When somebody gets to a point of ad homing you, it's because they're feeling uncomfortable, and it's sort of a response. And if they were to then acquiesce to your point of view, it would take really a lot of self-esteem to do that, to be honest.
yeah.
And even people within the movement have a hard time with that. I think what's really challenging, and I even have had to work through this myself, is that based on the methodology that we promote, which is that if someone produces evidence to the contrary of what you're talking about, and it's something that is not just like a one-time study, but it's repeated and it's confirmed and peer reviewed and those types of things, it's pretty solid evidence, then by our own philosophy, we need to acquiesce in that moment if we were holding a position that has now been falsified. And then the response would need to be, thank you. But that's Absolutely. A counter response to the way we operate as human beings, because what you really have to do is value truth over being right. And that's really challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're talking to people who are being confronted with that you have a lot of good information that is being, especially if it's on a public forum, which it sounds like it might be, if it's on a public forum where you're having these discussions, they know other people are reading, they know other people are watching, and their intent, when they went into the discussion, they wanted to come out looking smart, not stupid. So that's where it gets really challenging. If they're to the point of ad homing you, that's where you're not going to have that person change within that conversation. You're not going to see that. But if you did put out some information that would make them think, they may drop it all together and maybe 6 months later come out with different language. But they would never let anybody make the connection that you were the person who impacted that change.
Yeah.
Probably it might start an evolution of their train of thought, and it might loosen up their language around whatever you were trying to communicate to them. They might be more open to it later, but they would probably attribute it to something else.
Yeah, it's, I think that's just another form of the cognitive dissonance, where they just say, right, only I am going to convince myself whether I'm right or wrong. No one else is going to do it for me. And I guess in a sense that is a good thing to say, but then if you take that a bit too far, then you're essentially using yourself as the only reference point, where you decide what's true and what's false, and any objective information is based merely just on your opinion. And when it comes to issues like the right to an opinion. This is another sticking topic that I've found with people, where I try to explain to them, when you say you have a right to an opinion, what exactly do you mean by that? Do you have a right to think that I'm an idiot? Go ahead, fill your boots, mate. But, if I was a surgeon and I was actually in the middle of surgery, do you have the right to your opinion of what my next move should be? No. So having opinions and expressing opinions, fine. But, as I said in my transitional thinking presentation that I did for Z-Day 2012 in London, I said, when you entitle people to an opinion, then it becomes dangerous, because it enables people to cling on to opinions and reject facts.
Right. The focus has been put back on people instead of on the validity of the information itself.
Yeah.
And, what's interesting is there are supporters who would say they're advocates of the zeitgeist movement, the resource-based economic model, but then they also will use language talking about seeking a democracy and really advocating that, what we really need is the people's voices to weigh in. We need to all have a consensus. A direct participatory democracy, a lot of them will think. And I think, I think you've missed a point of what we advocate, that you're lumping these together, because a direct participatory democracy does put everyone's opinion sort of on the same level, just by the virtue of being a human being. And I think where the confusion comes in is that a lot of what we're working towards is human equality from a standpoint of access to resources. There's no class stratification or religious stratification or nationalism or anything that separates and divides people. So we are focused on equality, but where we differ in where some people view equality is they think, that means everybody's opinion is equal. And I have to say, if you evaluated the information we're actually presenting, we are recognizing that the person, like you mentioned, that we want to be doing surgery is not. We wouldn't want them to be working from, having polled all of our neighbors as to the best way to proceed with removing your brain tumor, and have that be what happens. And that's sort of what happens when we're in our current political system, where, of course, a lot of that's influenced by corporations and money and, that influencing votes. But it isn't based on information. It's based on opinions of what people think should happen.
Yeah. And I
solve the problem.
Yeah, and I found with especially when trying to gauge like a normal life, because obviously when you become an activist, you don't get whisked off into some parallel dimension where you all do your own things and you don't have to worry about the land of the living, as it were. We all still need to communicate and interact with this current society. So it's always when things like this come down to people saying, that's just my opinion, and I have a right to that opinion, and it can be quite socially divisive in that sense when it's like one group of people, two conflicting groups of people. One have one opinion that they're bad people, the other people have the same opinion about the others, and constantly in conflict. And what is going to resolve that? It's not opinion, it's the scientific method. or even you don't even necessarily need to go as even far as applying the scientific method. Just logic and reason. Just how do you know this? Right. Okay. What's your evidence? You don't even need to go through all the steps. You just say, right, is there rational justification for it? And just I've noticed that trying to apply those standards of evidence and rationality has I definitely agree with what you said earlier. We're not doing this to be